cider is more difficult to make than wine.
Hello, my name is Ria Windcaller, and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world.
Hip, hip, hooray!
That was Antoine Marois bringing us into this here episode 370, speaking about cider being more difficult to make than wine. And I'm sure all the cider makers out there, that made your ears kind of perk up a little bit. And you're in for a treat if you're wondering, wow, what exactly is he referring to? And perhaps you don't even need to hear anymore because you absolutely agree. But that would be really missing a delightful conversation with someone who has been on my radar for quite a while in France. He is situated in Pays, Normandy, and I was hearing these little trinklets of, not rumors, but folks talking about Domaine Marois, as you would call the estate where the cidery production is and he resides, and how it was really innovative. And that excited me, especially in a region where there's so much tradition and history around cider making. So I'll be going to that featured conversation shortly. But first, a wee bit of news from out and about in Ciderville. You can now see the list of winners from the International Cider and Perry competition that took place May 10th at the Cider Museum in Herefordshire, England. And one really big dominant winner that kind of took a lot of prizes, oh my goodness, and that would be Oliver's Cider and Perry Company, based in Herefordshire, led by Tom Oliver, who we just had on the episode, like 4 episodes back. It was an individual conversation with Tom, and then a couple episodes before that was a panel discussion where Tom was there speaking about whether SO2 sulfites are necessary in cider making. Both episodes you should listen to. Highly recommend. There was a really good panel discussion there. Everybody had so much very key info on a topical subject such as SO2. I will put a link in the show notes to that. I want you to just know that. And then I really want to give a tip of the glass to all the winners at the competition. We have a number of, I'm a fan of a number of those makers, of course. We saw one big sponsor of this podcast, which is Ross Cider and Perry Company. They walked away with the first place for a Perry. And Tom Oliver got the overall champion for his natural sparkling Perry. So big tip of the glass there. Outstanding news. Another reason to try your hand at UK cider. One of the ways you could do that is by looking at press, then press. So it's like press, like you push down and press something, then THEN, and then press again. So press, then press.com. And they can actually ship you some UK cider, and take them up on it. You don't know what your palate is missing until you try these ciders coming out of this region of the world that has been full on into cider making for a long time, have magnificent trees. They have those bitter sharps, bittersweet apples that we covet here. They have Perry pear trees that are old and really, just perfect for making a good Perry. So that is my tip here to all of you, to drink UK cider. Try it. It will only help the U.S. market, or whatever market you are in the world, kind of elevate your own palate. That's really what it's about. The taste buds, they evolve, and as you kind of maybe get used to one cider style, you could also get bored too. Your palate can get kind of bored, and it wants to be enlivened. And one way to do that is to go visit these locations. It's an English-speaking country, if English is your first language. And the folks are so inviting. There's tasting rooms everywhere. Just a wonderful region of the world. And one more thing. Thank you, Tom Oliver, for supporting this podcast. He's always been a big contributor to the podcast. And thanks, Tom. You do such a nice job. It's one of the things that I really watch about this guy here is how he works as a businessman in this community. He doesn't just stay in his lane. He's always working with social media. He's always reposting other people's comments about him. So he's keeping it in the news. He's keeping relevant. And he's also staying up to date on how to use social media. And he does it quite well. So if you don't follow him, you should, just for that tip alone, while you're waiting for your cider from the UK to be delivered.
Walking through the orchards.
We're coming up really quickly to cider making season in the Northern Hemisphere. I mean, on the last episode with the Cordic family farm, that was Dorsey and Brittany Cordic, they were talking about Hughes crab that come in really early. And if you're a cider maker, you might want to be able to contact them if you are near North Carolina and can pick up some of these Hughes crabs. That is like in summertime, where some of us in the Northern Hemisphere, where we're like, up in New England area, we're not really getting apples or crab apples at that time. So even though it feels far away, this is a good time to start thinking about what style of cider am I going to make? What cultured yeast might I be using? And what questions I might have about that. So I'm going to just put this little shout out there that I will be recording an episode with Fermentis, who's the world's leading provider of yeast for the market. And that will be with one of their in-house experts on the topic. So if you have a question about yeast, this is your opportunity to send a question this way to be asked on that episode. You could just send your questions to info@ciderchat.com.
Dancing in the streets.
Up next is our featured conversation with Antoine Marois, and he is the cider maker at Domaine Marois. This is a domain that is based in Pays d'Auge, Normandy. We actually made a stop there on our last French cider tour this past September, and I recorded this conversation with him before I brought the tour group out there. You'll hear that he doesn't really have an open tasting room. It's by appointment only. So the fact that we're able to have a sit down with him to do this recording, or I was able to have a sit down with him in the barrel room. I just want to give you the setup. I had arrived in Normandy early to make sure everything was ready for the French cider tour. So I was out there, then returned to Paris, and then took the French cider tour group out to Normandy. And that's just what I do as a matter of course when I'm leading tours. I like to make sure that everything's going to go smooth. And one way to do that is to arrive early and check things out. And because I was arriving early, I went to see Antoine and recorded this interview with him. On the way there, I got lost. I thought I had it down. I was all ready, and my Google Maps was just not working. I arrived on the other side of his domain somewhere on a back road and finally found this one woman. She came out of her home, helped me, got in her car, and had me follow her over to the domain, and I would have never found it otherwise. I arrived, we were pulling up to the domain, and you're going on this long road, and in the distance you see this big home. It's kind of square-like. It looks a lot like Domaine Dupont's home, in that kind of just immensity. It gives you this feeling like, oh my goodness, I'm in France. And sloping down to the right side, you're looking down to a hillside where there's apple trees and all that. So we pull up. Antoine says hello to this French woman. I say goodbye to her, thank you. And I look over into his back courtyard, and there's a giant, and I mean giant and old, like 300-plus-year-old oak tree that just is so formidable. The home is formidable. The tree is formidable. And Antoine is just so kind and sweet. So we did our interview in the barrel room because it was quite warm out, and that barrel room was filled with Calvados, and the smell alone, like a earth floor, right, with stone, low ceilings, really packed in barrel room. And I walk in, there's 2 chairs, there's a little moped there. I have a photo of that. I think I'll put that in the show notes. I want to make a little mark for myself, moped and show notes, just because it was just so cool, right? The smells in the air, he has glasses out. I'm like, all right, let's sit down and have this conversation. And it was just so wonderful because I had been wanting to speak to him for quite a while. And his wife, Marie, she's also in the cider trade. She's a cider maker herself at Domaine Dupont. She took on the role that Jérôme Dupont was doing at the domain there. And Domaine Dupont is not too far away, right? It's like a stone's throw kind of situation. So here you have Marie working at Domaine Dupont, and then her husband at their home has Domaine Marois. And Antoine came from the wine world, and now he's making cider at this domain that was a family's farm. You're going to hear all about it, but I want to tell you that I have been wanting to sit down with him for a while because he was elevating cider to the level that really intrigues me, and that's what you're going to hear. So this is your opportunity now to grab a glass and join this chat with Antoine Marois of Domaine Marois in Pays d'Auge, Normandy.
We are located in Normandy in a small region called Pays d'Auge, which is between Caen and Lisieux. And my village is Cambremer. It's a very small village, but you can find many cider and Calvados producers in this small place.
Mm-hmm. It's a very quaint village, too. It's inviting for tourists, and everywhere you see signs of Calvados and cider all over. It's a heaven for us cider fans.
Yes, you have what we call a route du cidre.
Mm-hmm.
15 different producers are on this road, so you can visit different producers and discover different kind of ciders and Calvados.
Now, the location of your domain here, how long have you been at this site? Because it feels like an ancient property.
It is an ancient property, but I settled here 6 years ago only. My grandparents were there, but they didn't make cider or Calvados. They had cows, but the fruits were sold to a distillery, so they didn't make Calvados or cider here. And when I settled here, I was working in the wine industry before, so my project was to make cider more than breeding cattle.
Okay. Well, are there still cows on the property here?
There are still cows, because it's very, very important to me, but I don't manage this cattle. I work with another farmer. It's a win-win relationship between us. He cares about cows, and I can really focus on cider.
Mm-hmm. So if you have cows, are they going through the orchard? And if they're going through the orchard, does that mean that you have haute tige, the standard trees that we'd say in English?
Yes, this is very typical from my region, Pays d'Auge. I'm really keen on this kind of orchard because you have many benefits working like this. I mean, having cows in the orchard is not only for a second product. It's really important for trees also. We've just moved the cows of the orchard because we will start harvest in a few days.
Of course.
But in the meantime, they've eaten some fruits on the ground, so when I will start harvest, it will be clean. So they like do the first sorting of apples.
Okay.
Which is very interesting. The most important thing with this kind of growing apples is that we need biggest diversity that we can.
Mm-hmm.
This is the key. Diversity is the key to have a natural balance. For example, some trees are sensitive to disease, but the tree next to this one will be resistant. So there is a natural balance. We don't have to add pesticide, for example, to protect the trees.
Right, yeah, to the orchard. That's fantastic. So this domain was your family's domain. So you're like the third generation on here?
Yes, I'm the third generation. It's quite new.
Okay, quite new.
Yeah, compared to other producers.
Right, sure.
It's quite new to me.
Right. So the domain is here. You're the third generation, and we're on a hillside overlooking it. How many hectares is this property, and how much of that is the orchard?
This property is 35 hectares.
Okay.
But not the whole area is planted with trees. Only 10 hectares are planted.
Mm-hmm.
Because, as I said, my grandparents had cows, and the first production, the most important for them was grass and not apple trees.
I see. Are you in the process of planting more trees then?
I am, because there used to be 30 hectares of apple trees here. If you're looking in the past, old pictures, you can see that everywhere you found trees, but with storms, my grandparents didn't really plant trees. So when I settled here, there were only 5 hectares of apple trees remaining.
Only 5 hectares?
Only 5, yes.
So already you have 5 hectares.
I doubled.
Doubled,
yeah.
Yeah. That's a lot of work.
All the trees I plant are haute tige, because I really believe that this is the future of farming.
I know in this region there's organic or biologic.
Yes.
And there's also biodynamic. What stage are you in currently? My understanding that you're moving towards fully organic, or are you there now?
Oh, the production is now certified organic.
Okay.
But I mean, I didn't change anything to
no practices.
To the practices. It was already organic, but
right.
it was not certified.
Yeah.
So now it is, and the next step is to keep on working the more naturally as possible. I'm trying to work on composts, the use of composts in the orchard, which is quite technical. So I need to experiment.
Is that like the biodynamic type of compost that you're talking about?
Yes, I would like to.
With the preparations?
Yes.
Okay, nice.
For the moment, I use the pomace. After pressing pomace, that I compost to put it back in the orchard. But I would really like to work as biodynamic farmers.
Well, you have the setup for it. You could be exactly what you need. You need the animals and the full closed system. So wonderful.
I may be 90% of biodynamic practices are already done. I mean, but you can go further.
You certainly can. Yes, it's quite interesting and a nice, healthy way to go about it. Good for the vitality of the orchard and the people and everything.
Yes, working in the wine industry, and when you want to work for yourself, you can buy a vineyard, of course, and make wine. This is what I wanted to do at the beginning, because we were working in the Rhone Valley with my wife. She's not from Normandy, she's from the southwest of France.
Okay.
So we hesitated between buying a vineyard in the southwest of France or coming back in Normandy to make cider. And finally, cider
won over.
Yeah.
Both of you are cider makers. What was that kind of switch that made you say...
I started to taste cider because I kind of forgot this product. But I wanted to rediscover this product. I tried to taste interesting ciders. For example, I was really amazed by Johanna Cécilion ciders in Brittany, Cyril Zang's in Normandy. Yeah, when I tasted these ciders, I realized that you can make something more interesting than only
a sweet product.
Yeah, sweet product, industrial cider. So these people really succeeded in this business. I realized that it was possible. Some of the producers they opened the door to other producers like me.
Well, that's often how it happens. Johanna in Breton, she's working with what we might say wild yeast or a natural ferment. Is that true with your ciders?
Half true, I would say. I couldn't take big risks because I started from scratch. I use wild yeast for the primary fermentation, which is the most important to me. But I still use selected yeasts for the second fermentation.
And when you say second fermentation, is it because you have it under the cork, so you're doing it like a traditional champagne, a method champagne?
Yes.
Champenois. Okay, so
not method champenoise, because I keep residual sugar in the bottle to make it sparkling. But yeah, we talk about method ancestral or pet nat.
Right.
Pet nat method.
Okay. So what you're doing is kind of this hybrid that we're seeing more and more with makers, which is really exciting because we get a bit of your terroir through your wild yeast and you blend it together. Do you stick with one primary select yeast, or do you change that depending upon what you're trying to make?
Now, for the primary fermentation, they're wild, so they're specific to my orchard and cellar, and this is really interesting to make unique ciders. And for the second fermentation, for the re-fermentation in the bottle, either use the wild yeast or selected yeast, depending on the type of cider I want to make. But the aim is to move to wild yeasts only. This is not easy because cider is more difficult to make than wine, but I think it is possible. It needs experience.
There's such a complexity with the wild yeast that you're still discovering each year when you work with it. And like you said, there's risk. And I want to explain again for folks who don't quite understand what he's saying here, is that when you make cider, you make it in large batches. And you want to make sure that it's going to go in a direction that it can then be put in a bottle versus maybe back out into the orchard, right? So that's the risk there. But you said that cider is more difficult to make than wine.
It's not more difficult to make industrial cider than making industrial wine. It's the same. I mean, it's only technical, but it's much more difficult to make natural cider than natural wine. And I have friends who are winemakers and who make wine and cider. To them, it's quite obvious that it's more difficult to make cider. Thing is that we have less research on cider than wine. Sometimes I ask something to my winemaker, the guy who advises me, and often I have questions and he doesn't know how to answer because he hasn't the knowledge about to answer my question.
Okay, right. So we need more research, a little bit more sharing of that too.
Yeah, we definitely need more research.
Now that's going to be funny for folks out there in Ciderville to hear that, because cider has been made now for 2,000 plus years, going back into like Asturias and the Basque region, and France is seen as one of those, I call it the sleeping giant, that is just kind of sitting on so many cider producers and a long history. And there are like some ancient books around cider making. So where are the particular spots where you you find yourself getting a little stuck.
The difficulty is when you want to be more accurate in the cider making. Something you don't want to happen in the cider, so you have to filter or you have to rack the cider.
Right.
You need to know what to do to avoid having those bad flavors, for example, or to slow the fermentation. And this is what is difficult, knowing what to do, what not to do to reach the goal you want.
Well, I mean, again, it has a lot of the same principles like winemaking. You want to have a good fruit to begin with, right? A select, specific, perhaps for a certain cider style. You want to watch out for the oxygen, right, as you would with wine. And to avoid the VA, the volatile acids, right? The acetone, those off flavors, the SO2, the sulfury flavors, and all that can kind of come in. And when you're working with a wild yeast, it can, what we might say, go rogue on its own. Become like a warrior yeast that takes over everything. So I could see how that could be a problem. But I have to admit, I've never had anyone say that it's more difficult than wine. So it kind of gives me a little bit of a pause to think about that, and kind of makes me happy to hear that. We are at this point in time, aren't we, where we're seeing the full bounty of what cider can be in the world. And we've been here for a long time as a world, but we've only just begun as a modern world in it, the exploration. You have these like beautiful labels.
Thank you.
Just lovely. You have some that are cork and cage, some are crown cap. They're all 750 milliliter bottles. I know that you work with a particular artist for your label.
Yes.
Should we give that person a shout out on the podcast here?
So when I started, I worked with Joël Passieux. I really wanted to express something from the country in the font, and he designed a special font for that. So we really met, and I was really happy to meet him.
And this is the font right here on the label.
Yes.
That's a rule.
Yes.
That right there tells me straight away, like, your precision on things. And many cider makers are like this.
So when I started coming from the wine industry, cider should be like wine. This is why I launched the first range called the Single Orchard range, which is inspired by what you can find in Burgundy, for example, or in the Rhone Valley. They really focus on terroir, and this range is terroir oriented. So I now have 5 different cuvées coming from 5 orchards, and I really want people to understand what terroir gives to a cider. And recently I launched a new range which is more creative and more like beer. I'm really interested in beer as well. I wanted to give more creativity to cider. Now there are 2 different ranges, so 2 different styles of cider.
And how would you describe those two different styles?
The first style is focused on terroir, as I said. I would say it's quite a classic style of cider from Normandy. And the second range, these cider are all one shot. So I really want to experiment different methods, co-fermentation. Each cuvée is made with another producer. It can be a winemaker, it can be a cooper, it can be another cider producer, but always with another person. So it gives more creativity. I mainly use stainless steel tanks.
Stainless steel. Okay.
Small ones, because I have many different ciders. So I don't have big batches, only small vats.
Well, what's a small batch?
A small batch is 2,500 liters.
Okay. And are these like variable tanks that?
Some of them are variable,
okay.
but Some others are
just self-contained, just
exactly
giant. I mean, that's a big tank to me, but maybe to somebody else, it's
Yes.
small. So it goes into the stainless steel. You're doing your primary fermentation. How many of these then go into oak, into barrels?
Only one.
Only one.
Yes.
Okay.
Before making cider, I went back to school to learn how to make cider because it's very specific.
Was that in Normandy?
In Normandy, in a place called Lycée du Robillard, which has a special course about cider making.
Mm-hmm.
I really realized in that school that you need hygiene to make cider the most naturally. You need to be very clean.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why I decided to use stainless steel tanks.
Mm.
But now I want to experiment different way of making cider, and this is why I started to make cider in barrels, oak barrels.
French oak?
It is French oak, made by a cooper called Defrièche. This guy is the last cooper in Normandy, and he developed a special heating of the barrels called chauffe normande. Chauffe normande, and I wanted to experiment a cider with this kind of heating.
And what do you think about it so far?
I'm really happy because you can really taste the difference.
So chauffe means, to translate that word chauffe would be...
Chauffe is when you heat the inside of the barrel to
toast it.
To toast it,
Mm-hmm.
yes. So it was toasted, but using my apple juice. So you have apple caramel inside the barrel.
During the toasting they use?
Yes, during the toasting.
How does that work? That sounds wild.
It's quite unique. This guy is the only one to make that kind of
like steaming
toasting.
it with is it steam?
It's
you're toasting,
it's a kind
you're
of
charring
secret.
it. Okay.
I'm not allowed to
all right, well,
to explain, but
of course
the result is quite unique.
Wow.
It gives a very complex, strong flavor of caramel. Hints of smoke too in the cider, so it's very interesting.
And I just want to be really clear here. So toasted, so it's like slightly charred inside, right? That's when you say toasted. That's what you're meaning. It's charred. Because
he lights a fire in the
he lights a fire. Okay,
in the barrel.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're not losing anything in translation there. Do you then use the barrels for your Calvados, or would... I know I'm jumping around here. We'll get back to the cider, but since we're on the topic of barrels, is that true for your Calvados barrels too? Those are lightly toasted, or?
For Calvados, I only use second-hand barrels that I buy from winemakers.
Okay.
And they are some 6 to 8 years old.
Okay.
So I don't want to get high tannins in my Calvados.
Mm-hmm.
I want something very soft. This is why I use this kind of barrel.
Yeah, and it's nice to be in a room with so many different sizes here. They're beautiful. This is a low ceiling. This building is probably from what century?
It's from the 18th century.
18th century, okay. So it's like posts and beam. It's a low ceiling. It's probably about 8 feet tall in here, I'm going to guess, with a gravel floor. And then I'm seeing some cement blocks, but we're also seeing like natural stone, very classic kind of Norman style. And the barrels are all racked up on like wooden racks, which can't be easy to get in here or out of here, but they're going to be sitting here for a long time, and that's fine. It's very cool. It's quite warm out today, even though it's September. It's a warm September, and there's just a general coolness in the air. Just, you could smell just the angel share in the air. It's a lovely aroma.
Angel share. I have a small angel on the top of.
Oh, I see that.
Can you see it?
I can. A little, what do you say? A little angel,
it's
like
a crystal.
A little crystal angel.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. All right, so oak. I just love talking about oak. But let's go back to your cider now and continue talking about that. So, 2 different styles. The one we'll kind of go with like the traditional method, but now you're going much more experimental, bringing in the passion for the craft beer, and when I take that, you mean there's that craft brewers love to like do a little bit of everything, but we also see that with cider too, right? It's happening worldwide with folks being a little dynamic. Let's talk about the blends that you're doing with that, and you're working with different orchards. You're doing co-ferments. When you say co-ferments, I'm thinking a co-ferment with apples and wine,
pears, for example.
Okay.
Yes, grapes. It's not really a co-fermentation, but I used grape skins after pressing, so they are dry. But I put it in the cider, so it's kind of infusion. And I got really interesting flavors coming from these grapes. You can smell pepper, for example, which is typical of Pinot d'Aunis, which is grapes from the Loire Valley, and I'm really happy with this cider.
And which one is that?
It's the Fox.
The Fox, and so that is called. Is that La Meute?
La Meute. La Meute. I don't know the English translation. It's when wolves, a group of wolves. Wolves.
Right. I think we call them a pack.
And it's the name of the range.
Nice.
And each cuvée is named with an animal. They're all one shot. So I change animals every year. So it is quite...
That's fun.
It's funny to design these labels.
It is. Well, I'm going to jump over here because this one says, and let me make sure I pronounce this correctly, Jurassic.
This cuvée comes from a very small orchard, and this orchard is planted directly on the rocks. I mean, you have a very, very shallow soil. The roots are on the limestone rocks from Jurassic. This is what. This is why I named it Jurassic, and it's interesting because apple trees have not deep roots; they have shallow roots. So if you have the rocks directly on the roots, you can really get the minerality, and this is what you feel when you taste this cider.
How do you explain minerality to someone who's tasting it?
So many people use it, but the most important is what you feel when you taste it. It's difficult to explain, and everyone doesn't feel the same, but you have to taste it, and
right. We have that, and then we have La Roche.
La Roche. La Roche is the name of the place where this orchard is planted. It means the rocks. So the soil is more deep on this orchard. But you have on top of this orchard, you have you can see the rocks.
They're up in the field. Makes it difficult for the tractor, right?
Not really, but you have it's a kind of border made of rocks.
A stone walls. No?
Yeah, but natural stone walls.
Natural stone walls. Okay, like ledges.
Yes.
Okay, ledges. Okay. Yes, because I know that there are really unique stones around. There's a lot of schist in Normandy.
In the southwest of Normandy, and also, here in Pays d'Auge we don't have schist.
Schist, no.
We only have limestone and flint. flints,
Okay.
but no schists.
Okay. All right. Very good. Another bottle here, and I see that that's a little deer.
Yes,
And
it's not a kangaroo. 'Cause some people.
That's definitely not a
think
kangaroo. That's not a kangaroo. As far as I might call it, like a mule deer, because the ears are so big. So what is it called?
It's called chevrette, and chevrette in French is the female deer. I fermented this cider in the barrels I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And the chevrette, the deer, is just to refer to the origin of this cider because it's made of wood.
This next bottle here is a mink. We'd say a mink. It's white, so it must be in the winter. Are minks always white, or how does that work?
No, it changes.
It changes colors, yeah.
The color changes.
But I don't think that's the name of this. Is this?
I don't know the English translation of hermine. It's a small animal which is also the symbol of Brittany.
Oh yes, I know. It isn't a mink. It's not. It'll come to me. An Adamine. Oh, an ermine.
Yes, it's a kind of weasel.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is the symbol of Brittany because I made it with a friend of mine who makes cider in Brittany. And it's 50% apples from Brittany and 50 from Normandy, which is a kind of joke because our two regions compete to make the best cider, and we wanted to end up with this. I mean, we are friends. There is no competition between us.
Right. Are you using the same apples?
No. The idea was to use typical apples from our regions. So Cedric chose one variety, and I chose another one. They are both very different, but they mix really well in the bottle.
Can you say what the apples are for those of us who are apple geeks?
The one from Brittany is Marie Marois. It's a bitter apple. Okay. And the other one is Fréquin Rouge. It's also a bitter apple. Mm-hmm. This cuvée has a high bitterness, but it's also quite sweet, so you have a nice balance. Mm-hmm. It's full-bodied, but it's also very fruity, juicy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now a sour apple too. Okay. That gives more freshness.
And what's the name of the sour apple?
Rambo.
Rambo
is from Normandy.
Right now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different bottles, and this one here is a cork and cage.
La Garenne.
La Garenne.
It's the name of the plot, the name of the
land.
The land
where it came from.
And it means the burrow.
A burrow for
rabbits.
Oh, a burrow for rabbits. Okay. Okay.
And here you have many rabbits, so you understand why they called it La Garenne.
La Garenne, yeah, right. And so if there's a lot of rabbits living there, what kind of soil would we see? Would that be with the limestone soil?
It's a
too?
clay and limestone.
Clay and limestone?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I would like you to taste this one too, because you will really understand the difference between the two range.
I won't argue with that.
So this is the grapes skins maceration, and there is a very special flavor.
Oh, I get it right on the nose.
You get it, yeah?
Totally, yes. Yeah. All right, let me sit down and get into this. Give it its dues. So we have that same kind of really rich color and a very nice golden.
It's more cloudy.
A little bit of cloudy.
Yeah.
The nose is just totally different. You know that there's something going on. It's almost as if the nose gives me anticipation of a little bit more tannin. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
A little.
A little bit more acid.
Little bit more acid and very dry compared to the previous one. You have very low residual sugar.
This is delicious.
It's different, but I like it too.
It's delicious. I really like it. It's very accommodating to the mouth. It's the dryness just, it kind of makes my body go, because I'm not having to, this is what I love about some ciders. I don't get it with every cider, but when it allows me to relax.
Yes.
And, you know, the sweet sometimes doesn't always do that for me, but a dry cider allows me to kind of sit back a little bit, and I'm able to relax into it. And this immediately made me feel it has like a pleasant experience with it. I know that's not what we would say in like technical words, but my listeners will know exactly what I'm talking about.
Feeling is the most important. This is what we are looking for. Emotion, you know, not technical
balance.
Things.
It's balance. And I feel like pH and all that really impacts my body very physically. So it's so well balanced. That's what you have here. And that's why what we're talking about, that feeling is really, you know, it's not too sweet, you know, or anything. It's just right there. That is fantastic. That is a really good cider.
It's very different, but I like them both, you know. It's like your children, they are different, but you cannot choose.
Yeah, really lovely. I love how this pops right in the beginning. That's where it's very bright, but not over the top. That balance is right there. And to be able to do that with a dried pumice, was that right with that one?
Yes.
A dried pumice.
Pumice from Pinot Donis grapes.
Is that something that's typical that you could find dried pumice, or was this something that you worked with the winemaker to get that?
You cannot buy it. You have to know someone.
Person who has it, because I've had a lot of collaborations. I love, you know, the wine and the cider. People are fusing that together. But sometimes the wine can really take over. And what's nice about this is that it's still apple forward. Like the base of the apple is right there. And the delicacy of the grape kind of brings it to the next level. But it's really the apple that's still really pronounced here, and that's a skill.
And it is still a cider.
Yes, absolutely.
Because you have no grape juice. It's not really a co-fermentation. It's to make a cider in Europe. You can only use apples or pear. No other juice. Fruit juice. But as I used only the dry skins, it is still a cider.
Fantastic. Wow.
It's like hopped cider, you know?
Right.
Hop cider.
Hop cider.
Hop cider is still a cider.
It's balanced. That's what's nice. It's super balanced. It's not too acid. It has just enough to like bring you through. Really beautiful. Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Would you like to taste this one for the last one?
Sure.
Yeah. This is the one I fermented in the barrels.
The barrel? Okay.
This one is stronger. It's 8.5 ABV.
Okay. And now you can see the color is a little bit more like caramelized. It's much more rustic kind of amber. Totally different nose on each of these three ciders. And I'm getting a little bit of that wild yeast. Sometimes when people say wild, they think like funky or something like that.
Yeah.
But this gets me in like the orchard. You're having that really ripe apples. And it's almost like there's a little caramel in the nose.
Yes, you really can smell the caramel.
Yeah. Let's take a sip. Mm.
And
Wow.
you have very low residual sugar. It's only 3 grams per liter. So,
But the complexity in this cider here. So on the nose you get the caramel, but on the tongue you're getting kind of like a little bit of buttery,
yeah.
but not strong caramel at all. Which, people might think, oh, well, okay, you're going to get that like sweetness, but you're saying it's very, very
No,
low
you
sugar.
don't have sweetness.
You're not getting that at all. Super rich. This in the glass, I know the future is bright. So I wish you the very best on your endeavors and look forward to following your story.
Thank you.
At ciderchat.com for this year episode 370 with Antoine Marois of Domaine Marois. You'll be able to see some of the photos that I was talking about and also the artwork on these beautiful bottles of cider. And by now, at the Cider Chat YouTube channel, you'll be able to see me tasting one of his ciders in the playlist titled Bottles on My Desk. So just check that out at the Cider Chat YouTube channel. And while there, please do subscribe. And with that, I leave you here. This is Rio Wind Caller signing off for now. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville.
Drink it like this.
There is a reason why we do it like this.
There is a reason why we do it like this. There is a reason why we do it like this. There is a reason why we drink it like this. There's a reason why we do it like this.
Yeehaw!